Should we get started? Let's do it. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Dancing with Tantalus panel discussion. My name is Blair Fornwald, and I'm the Director Curator of the School of Art Gallery here at the University of Manitoba. The School of Art Gallery, School of Art, and University of Manitoba are on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of both past and present, and we dedicate ourselves to doing better, to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities, and working in the spirit of conciliation and collaboration. If you are joining us from elsewhere, I would encourage you to consider your relationship to the land that you were on and to its original caretakers. I have a few thank yous and housekeeping notes before this panel gets underway. And during this time, I'm just going to share my screen so that you can see some of the exhibition images from Dancing with Tantalus. It's really beautiful exhibition, which has unfortunately been closed for reasons. Okay, so let me just, all participants can share. Let's see how this works. How's that? Wonderful. So yeah, I'm just gonna let this slideshow cycle while I finish up my job. Okay, so exciting news. First of all, the exhibition has been closed, but we are presently working on a plan to allow us to safely reopen the gallery, and we should be receiving a decision about our proposal any day now. So I would just ask you to check our website and social media platforms for updates on when and how you are going to be able to come and visit Dancing with Tantalus, as well as John Sasaki's poignant video installation, Arrest, which are both up at the gallery right now. The School of Art Gallery is generously supported by the University of Manitoba. Whoop, why can't I switch this image? There we go. The School of Art Gallery is generously supported by the University of Manitoba, the School of Arts faculty and staff, national and provincial funding agencies, donors, and volunteers. And the work that we do wouldn't be possible without our fantastic team: Donna Jones, C.W. Brooks, Jean Borbridge, Christina Hajar, C.L. Cottle, and Casper Stein. We also received tremendous support from the School of Arts staff, and on this occasion, I want to extend a special thank you to Shelley McCafferty for her generous assistance in installing the exhibition, to Kaylin Harrison for her assistance with tonight's talk and with promotion, and also to Christiane Church for documenting this show and providing us with these great images. I would also like to thank Tobin Gibson at Unit 17 for lending us Gabrielle L'Hirondelle Hill's work for this exhibition. And of course, I would like to thank curator Lillian O'Brien Davis and the artists Gabrielle L'Hirondelle Hill, Katie Lyle, and Ella Dawn McGeough for the materially and conceptually rich and insightful work, and also for their tremendous flexibility as we have navigated together how to install this exhibition, which responds really sensitively to space and to proximities between objects. And to be able to do that remotely and via Zoom and cameras was it was difficult and it was interesting. And I thank you for your patience. I think the exhibition is absolutely gorgeous. We also have a full slate of exciting digital programs that folks can participate in no matter where they are located. In conjunction with this exhibition, we will be hosting an upcoming writing workshop with artist and writer Nick Wilson on March 6th. Nick's also going to be producing a response text for the exhibition, which should be out soon. And on March 7th, we're going to be offering a movement workshop with Katie Lyle and her collaborator, dancer and choreographer Shelby Wright. On March 11th, we will be hosting a live streamed performance by dancer and choreographer Allie Robson, responding to some of the themes and research informing this exhibition. I wonder if I can just do that again. Boop. I just want to thank Nick, Shelby, and Allie in advance for their thoughtful contributions to our programs and for providing other avenues to think through the themes of this exhibition. Just visit the School of Art Gallery's website, Facebook, or Instagram to check out all of our upcoming events, both on and offline. Housekeeping time. Please note that we will be recording this video and uploading it to the School of Art Gallery's YouTube channel for posterity and later viewing. I would also like to ask that everyone make sure that their audio is muted, although it seems like everybody's pretty good at Zoom at this stage in the game. If you check your microphone icon and if it's red or if it's green, please click it onto mute. You'll know it's on mute because it'll be red. We also have ASL interpreters available for tonight's talk. Their names are Shannon and Christina, and they will be trading on and off throughout this talk. If you use ASL interpretation, you can pin their screen so that it's always visible to you by right-clicking on their screens or on their names in the participants menu and choosing pin video as an option. If you are having any trouble, please message us in the chat window and we will help you out. If you have a question or comment, please use the chat function to ask it, or you can use that little hands up react button to the right of your screen. We will try to flag you so that you can unmute your mic and ask your question if you prefer doing that. We will also be live streaming tonight's talk on our YouTube channel, and we will endeavor to send questions posted to the YouTube over here to Zoom so that our panelists can consider them and answer them. There's also going to be a bit of dedicated time at the end of tonight's talk for Q&A. Okay, and finally, it's a real honor and pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator and Dancing with Tantalus curator, Lillian O'Brien Davis. Lillian is a curator and writer from Toronto. She is currently based in Regina for a few more days, where she is assistant curator at the Mackenzie Art Gallery. Very shortly, she will be returning to Toronto to join the team at Gallery 44 as curator of exhibitions and public programs. She is interested in experimental curatorial and artistic practices, and works collaboratively with artists to produce exhibitions and research that delve into difficult questions around identity, the environment, and our entanglements with colonial histories. Her writing has appeared in Canadian Art, Blackflash, and Peripheral Review, and her curatorial projects have appeared at the Jackman Humanities Institute in 2018, the Art Museum at the University of Toronto in 2019, and Susan Hobbs Gallery in 2020. Everyone, please give a warm digital welcome to Lillian O'Brien Davis. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you so much, Blair, for hosting us tonight and hosting this exhibition. This is a project that first had an iteration in Toronto in 2020 in the fall that just featured the work of Katie and Ella Dawn. And then we were lucky enough to include Gabrielle into the project and then have an enlarged iteration of the project occur here at the School of Art. And yeah, thank you to Blair and Jean and Brooks in particular for their flexibility and generosity as we sort of figured out what it means to install a show remotely during a pandemic, because there's all sorts of little road bumps and things like that that come up unexpectedly. So as Blair mentioned, I'm currently in my empty apartment in Regina, waiting to leave town. And so I'd like to acknowledge that I am on the land that is the Treaty 4 territory, the homeland of the Cree, Saulteaux, Lakota, Nakota, Dakota, and the homeland of the Métis people. And then as this is a great live Zoom, you are gathered where you are. So I'm happy to be here speaking with the artists, and it's funny having no one be able to see the show. So hopefully having the slides gives you a little bit of context, but I'll do my best to be very generous with my descriptions to give you a sense. But this project began with an interest in situations of contact and its lack that become caught between desire and crisis. We did reading together, thinking about Karen Barad's ideas of entanglement and touch, and Anne Carson. And this one quote from a text that I've read by Anne Carson that really sticks with me and I'd like to kind of open with is very short, and it's, "Every touch is a modified blow, a violation of a fixed boundary where one does not belong." And for me, this is at the very heart of the show. The artworks in the show are haptic examples of the delicate dance of proximity, a continual cycle of moving close, pulling away, and circling back again. And so this idea for me kind of came out of different levels of kind of consideration and research for over a year ago. And I've kind of talked about it with different people, and it sort of is funny, I guess, that it's come together at this time where we really can't be together. And I think, though that is sort of like something that is on everyone's mind, we didn't want to make this a show about that. So I think I'll articulate that right away. But I think it feeds really well into the kind of like moment that we're in and the kind of crisis of touch that we are having. And so I guess to begin, a general question that I have for each of you or all of you is, and I have this written down, but it's I'll try my best to be clear about what I'm asking. But what is your main interest in what I see as each of your curious, delicate, and ephemeral approaches to material experiments? And when I went over this question with my partner, he said, "What's your relationship with the breakable?" And I think that's a much clearer way of asking what I want to ask. So what is your relationship with the breakable?
I have my mic on, I guess I can go first. Breakable is a funny term for me in relation to painting, but I totally get the gist of the question, and it really speaks to me in terms of how I work, which is kind of applying and then taking away and rethinking and constantly undercutting my own kind of ideas about everything. So certainly the breakable, or the idea that something is unfinished, kind of that something is in, that a painting even is in a constant kind of state of movement, or that the narrative of the painting is that it will change, and that the process of it changing is kind of one of the main parts for me of both kind of the imagery that happens, and also kind of the way that my actions are kind of made visible on the surface.
Me and Ella are in a race to see who goes last. I think that's a good question. I think there's so many things that I thought about while making the flags, especially that are in the show. They're really slow things to make, and you have to be really careful while you make them. And I definitely thought a lot about the sort of primacy of the visual in, I guess, in like Western ideas of knowledge, how you can know something, and how we interpret the world, and a lot of which is, comes down, handed down through the Enlightenment, through Western ideas of knowledge, which are just really focused on like the eyes tell the truth or something. When I think that's like just such a small part of the equation. So I was interested in really in looking at how other senses tell the truth, and how, like, specifically when working with tobacco, how like it's a material that mediates through physical materiality into smoke, into it crumbles and then it travels with its scent as well. So it kind of has these multiple lives. And then I think which talks to you about knowledge and how we understand what's knowable. But I think my other interest in and I often make things that are quite fragile or tenuous, and I think my other interest in that is just thinking that things aren't permanent, and to me that's like a great relief, like that what seems like something you are stuck with or can't get rid of. And of course I'm talking about like lived realities and political existence, and that it's not permanent, and that it is fragile in its own way. So I think that is like a great it's like very comforting to me to think that. So I often work with those ideas of like impermanence.
Yeah, I mean, so many of our anxieties leading up to the show related to what you mentioned at the beginning, Lillian, about us not wanting it to seem like a COVID show around anxieties of touch, because we're all feeling those anxieties right now in a very real, very like on the surface way. But I think that that's what catastrophes or crises do. They make other crises, they make other catastrophes evident. The sort of ongoing catastrophes that have sort of like underlaid our lives, and some people's lives more than others for a long time. And so for me, this notion of the breakable, I do relate it to catastrophe, and catastrophe both in the like horrific sense of that term, but also in the world turning over. That when something breaks, like most of my work is breakable, but I enjoy that break. I sort of like flirt with that break, or I edge towards that break in order to see if the work can survive, if it can become something else after that break, or if sometimes it's stronger than I give it credit for. And then to that point as well, when I think about breakability, I also think about systems of precarity and sort of like personal precarity, social precarity, cultural precarities. And again, how some bodies are, this is sort of like a serious term, but like more embanked than others, have more protection around them than others. And so, yeah, with the work that I make, there is a fragility or a relation to sort of a real sort of human body in space. And I want it to sort of be as amenable, but also as sort of worrisome as a human or an animal body or otherwise.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like a lot of the writing that I've been doing around this show is like about when we installed in Toronto, we didn't have such a robust infrastructure. So like we did the install ourselves. And so I was carrying artwork around, and I wrote about and talked with you two about like the kind of fear of like dropping something, and it was for me quite paralyzing. But to hear you talk about it, it's sort of like there's like a release or a relief that I didn't feel, and that sort of engages me because it's an interesting relationship with objects, and this show is objects. Like it's such a material show in a way that is fun. It's extra funny now because you can't see it in person. but you will be able to, fingers crossed, but you just currently cannot. They're objects that are created in close proximity to the artist's hands or body in their need, the material need. And so I'm sort of interested in talking about the material circumstances of each of your work. And specifically, I'm first thinking about Ella, with you're working with copper and wax, respectively. And you're really deliberate whenever we talk about the work that you're making in terms of the kind of wax that you select. And then I remember you sending me a text like, these copper sculptures these are the fruit ones, where there's sort of this like really particular selection, and even in sort of the your choice of paint and the kind of material selections are meticulous down to the kind of ingredients of the paint. And I'm really struck by the traces that appear within these. And I'm wondering if you could share a bit about your process of making each of these works, which I should clarify that there's like copper sheet sculptures that you would have seen in the slideshow. And then separate from that, there are these really amazing wax pillows that are on low platforms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it strikes me again, like as you're speaking, that people can't come to see the show, but they also can't bump into the show. They can't bump, like as a sculptor or someone who works primarily in sculpture, I'm always sort of aware of that like adage that sculpture is a thing that you bump into when you're trying to look at a painting. But you also we can't smell the work. We can't like be with the work at present. Like we actually, like us four, can't be and haven't been with the work in this iteration. But as to the materials, like all materials are in a constant state of transformation. They're like constantly between and moving, and even whatever stays like appears or is apparently static is not static at all. It's on its way to a dump, or it's on its way into a system of protection and care, or it's whatever, it's in a studio and it's going to be transformed there. But what I love about copper or wax or increasingly fabric that I'm working with is that it shows traces of marks or touch like quite quickly, and it's sort of evidently in a state of transformation. There's a speed with which it both accrues marks, but also can sort of relay to a viewer or to a witness, or however you want to describe that, that it's like shiftability. And so with wax, in a more sort of like Euro historical sense, it was often used within like lost wax casting, within like bronze foundries or other type of metal foundries, and it was never meant to be the thing. So the object would have been carved in wax, or it would have been cast towards wax, but it was never meant to be that. And so with the pillows, again, back to your sort of point about breakability, the edges, like the hardest part about making them is getting a corner, and the corners sort of are the first to leave. So if you get to see those corners, that's like it's kind of for me, it's sort of a special experience, both when they appear out of the original cast, and the cast that I produced them in is just a vinyl bag that I sew, or within a gallery or a studio setting. So for example, when they showed up, Brooke sent me, who installed the exhibition, sent me a image saying, "Oh no, this corner looks like it's crumbling," and it was like, good, that's like it's living, like that's what it's meant to do. It's meant to sort of be like constantly sort of changing, like that's what we should all be doing all the time, in my opinion. And with copper of course has this complex history as a material and has varying sort of cultural reference depending on where you are in the world. But within my life, it was one of the first materials that I started using as a teenager. It was something that was available to me at like Rona or Home Depot, sort of copper wire, and I was making copper wire necklaces and jewelry and other sort of like really bad trees. But it was like I was amazed by the softness of it, that my hands that weren't that strong, I was like 13, 14 years old, could bend metal. That seemed like mind-blowing to me, that my force could exert change in that way. And then as far as the copper sheets go, I've only been sort of doing those for the last couple of years, and the idea for that came about in a studio visit with the curator writer Anna Kovler, an artist. And I was making a installation with a couple of other artists. We were collaborating and did a panel for some these really cool speakers called sound exciters to go on. And I was thinking glass or something. She's like, why don't you use copper? That's such a conductive, receptive material. It's a material that's already used in speakers. And I brought it into the studio, and I'm really careful about what I bring into the studio. Like I move a lot, so I have to be careful about not accruing too much, but I also want to be like really sensitive about my like ecological responsibility around materials. And so I brought it in and was kind of amazed that even if I was just carrying it from the van into my studio, the fingerprints of my hands left marks on the side. And so I started hosting these picnics on them, and they started accruing this this social contact. And usually what I use to change the surface is generally like based on desire. So I think we were like, when I made those, it was the fall, winter, and kind of like worrying about winter coming, and the fruit of summer seemed to sort of like hedge that off a little bit.
Yeah, I like your kind of joking point about how sculpture is what you bump into when you're looking at a painting, because there are also paintings in this show, but also just like the way that we installed this show, and like how this project has kind of been worked on over both iterations has been like I think very flexible and fluid, like to kind of extend this conversation that we're having around like how things are changing and evolving. And so like I had a really hard time kind of nailing down like a formal installation plan, because it felt kind of necessary to be more experimental. I think it turned out really nicely, even with the kind of added barrier of not being able to kind of be in the space and push things around ourselves. But I know, like, I'm thinking in particular about those like copper sculptures, and how you sort of worked with Brooks to find find the
I should mention that. It's funny because it's like, so for everyone else who doesn't know this, so the copper pieces always sort of rest on a support structure, or that's how they've sort of become in the last little while. And that support structure is generally like very simple, sort of found in situ. The ones for the show, for the works that I've shown in Toronto, the platforms have come out of the sculpture studio that I work in at York, and then they go back into that sculpture studio afterwards. And there are platforms with casters on them that are sort of intended to move heavy materials back and forth, or fragile materials back and forth between whether the foundry or the ceramic studio. And so originally my plan was to fly to Winnipeg and source materials there, whether in the sculpture workshop or the theater department, but that not being possible, and also wanting to be like conscientious about how much labor I was like asking someone other than myself to apply. And with conversations with Brooks and I, they took photos of plinths that were in storage, and most of them were white, and then one was this sort of like fatty, fleshy, dusty pink. And it just sort of like, it was just very different than all the rest of the sort of more institutional. Yeah, as Blair's saying, dirty eraser, that's perfect. And so luckily I had mineral paint here in Toronto that was like an exact match. So I was able to send that. And so all the other plinths were painted the same color. And so, yeah, it was just like trying to be like really amenable to the space and to the possibilities of the space, and not, trying to make it easy on myself and others. Like taking support seriously. Support seriously.
Yeah, and kind of continue along, we had like there's the Ella's supports that were like in part of her work, and then we also had this idea, and I don't really recall like how we landed there really, but like we talked a lot about kind of like movement in space, and this sort of like Dancing with Tantalus came out of this idea of like a dance of jealousy, or a dance of movement where everyone is moving but no one is touching. And there's kind of elements of performance to that. And so we sort of landed on including these temporary walls as these sort of injunctions into the space, or interruptions, or like just a way to kind of reform this or interrupt the space. And so they're kind of installed or placed at different angles, and they create, as Blair was saying, these kind of peaks and corners. And then there's also different surfaces where like Katie's paintings are hung sometimes on the back, or like very much off to one side. And Blair and I did a curatorial walkthrough conversation a couple of weeks ago when the show was first installed, and with talking about looking at Katie's works together, or like together over Zoom, we really focused in on like how you chose to hang your work, because like we were all on the Zoom calls together and sharing our input. And in particular, Sea Change, it's the painting that I want to focus on, which you would have seen in the slideshow, is a painting that's hung so much to the left that a bit of it is kind of off the wall. And so that if you were to walk to the other side, you could see some of the back of the painting. And I have a certain feeling that I was writing out my questions, and I was like, I don't know, like if I have the right language to ask you this question, which is a big buildup now, but it's like I get a kind of sculptural sense from like the decisions that you make in terms of having the kind of spatialization that happens when like the painting just doesn't become something that's on the wall, but it's sort of like active. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about like how you see them as spatial objects, or like the way that they live in space. And I think is really unique to your work. And I'm also thinking about the kind of experimentation that you did in both iterations with like paint extending kind of like on the walls, on the surface of the walls, which I know was something that was like very much a kind of experiment at first, and then like you've been kind of working through your language with that. And so, yeah, I guess that's a two-parter around like your kind of interest in how the work is installed, and then the additional like interest in the wall painting. And so for folks who need a little bit more context, the blue of the temporary walls is kind of an extension, or maybe Katie, I'll let you put it into words, but it's an expansion of the installation of Katie's work, is hopefully a good framing for it.
Yeah, maybe I would start with like the end part of the question. But I feel like they're all connected in the sense that I think for me, both these shows just were an opportunity where I was like, well, I'm going to try something in the space. Like that's how I work in the studio. Like these paintings are made unstretched. I'm kind of cutting up paintings and gluing them back together into other paintings. Like there's this, I was even thinking with the first question of kind of additional things I was thinking about, that there's this kind of need that I have to kind of, I said undercut my own kind of ideas, but also kind of change direction, or like feel like there's something that I haven't planned or that is not already determined. So I think that kind of process of saying like, oh, maybe I'll paint on the wall was like very scary. But that's the feeling that I think has to be there on some level, both with making the work, and why say that it's only there with making the work. It feels like if we have this opportunity, especially to like be in the space, an installation is something that I'm, as a painter, very excited about thinking about, like not finishing the paintings in the studio, but thinking about how they exist when they leave the studio. And maybe all those kind of lives or versions that they've lived leading up to that place as well. So certainly that kind of looser underpainting or wash are kind of treatments that are interesting to me about painting, like kind of applying something where you don't go back into it. It's there, and kind of the mistakes or the marks you made are kind of laid bare, in total contrast to the way that I tend to work. And again, kind of with the blue, or with the idea of kind of a wash, I'm always really drawn to those kind of, I don't know, a wall that you walk past, kind of maybe an alley, or even when I've worked at galleries, like the outside of the gallery will get kind of covered in graffiti, and someone goes out and kind of paints one line of gray to try and cover it. So this kind of process of accumulation for many different reasons that kind of is kind of creating a different type of surface. So with the different paint treatments on the wall, those are some of the things I was thinking about, I guess. And then installation, so like the painting being hung off the side, or kind of even just, I think I was definitely a supporter of having these walls, or kind of temporary structures that broke up, both kind of like the big kind of cube of the gallery, kind of changing the view of what we would see, and also creating structures that felt temporary, kind of spoke to the show in that sense, and also kind of created, maybe this kind of space where things could gather, or kind of like pile up or hide behind. That felt kind of exciting. As something we didn't get to do in maybe a smaller, more architectural space, it felt kind of like an interesting opportunity to kind of like overlap our works in different ways. And then with the hanging, I haven't done anything like that before, so it still feels pretty new. And I would say not being there was certainly like a challenge for hanging paintings, for me at least. So I definitely feel interested in kind of the experiments and kind of how they were hung, but I think maybe same as you, I'm not sure I have all the words to describe it. Except for maybe one thing I was thinking while you were asking the question, was the fact that these paintings are not made on stretchers. So like maybe kind of showing them in different ways starts to kind of have them exist as objects, kind of that kind of stretching the canvas was like this other step that happened versus kind of stretching the canvas, gessoing it, making the painting. They kind of exist much more kind of in this state of flux where I was, I guess, taking, for people who haven't seen the show, there's like canvas that's then kind of glued with wax and adhesive to other pieces of canvas and kind of ripped, or kind of the edges are, it's already like the painting has been separated from its original place and kind of salvaged onto this canvas that it's on right now. So it's kind of already stating that it's in transition, and maybe the installs are just kind of an extension of that, of kind of showing the back, showing the side, exposing a process of deciding.
Yeah, I like that process of deciding. And I know, like, Ella used this amazing analogy that I think about all the time when we were talking about install, or like glasses at a dinner table, in terms of kind of like finding a rhythm for having the work come together that wasn't necessarily like Katie has the walls, Ella has the floor, like, and Gabe has like the higher walls, with the, like, to find this more of a relationship, or a way of establishing a relationship, because you know, the show is a real indulgence in material, at least like for me, that's how it's been. And I think there are many layers, but that's sort of like, I think one of the like great things about, I think, walking through the space is sort of like that, being able to explore that kind of like physical experience of like moving through these relationships or arrangements between the objects that are hopefully conversational, or just like friendly with one another. And I was just thinking about like getting pictures from Blair and Brooks standing underneath Gabrielle's work bundle and being like, it's here. And the kind of like presence that it has, and the kind of like excitement that elicited, and being like, wow, it really smells like there's like an aroma to it. And same with the flags. And Blair shared an anecdote that Brooks like had this kind of like really a sensorial experience in terms of like when handling your flags, Gabrielle. And yeah, it's I would go see the show. This whole thing is like a long commercial. But Gabe, the first thing, like, I haven't been able to speak to you as much about your work and the show. And so one of the things I've been really wanting to ask you about is the process of caring for the flags. So there are 3 flags made of tobacco leaves in the show. And so we were so excited to have them arrive, and they arrive in this really amazing kind of like packaging, and they're rolled, and there's a really robust process in sort of bringing them back to life, or sort of waking them up again after their shipment, especially in the prairies, because of how dry it is. There's like, you know, needing to bathe them in this treatment to kind of like bring some moisture back into the leaves, and then kind of unfurling them and letting them rest, and then kind of having them installed, and then revisiting them and treating them as you go along. And I can't take any credit. This is all Brooks and Blair who were handling this, and so they're the kind of like actors of care. But I think you sort of kind of alluded to this in terms of how you make the work, but then this sort of like afterlife, or like extension of that act. And I wondered how much you did or did not consider that while you were making them, that kind of like their future existence and how they live.
I think the with the flags, like my considerations about how delicate they are sort of has evolved as I made more. So the first one that I made, I really was like, what can I do with this tobacco? And the first flag that I made is called Orinoco Note. And it's quite large. It's like maybe 80 inches long. And it's sewn from whole leaf tobacco. So before it's shredded, you know, like it's a full dried and cured leaf, and you can kind of cut strips of it and sew it together. And this is something I just figured out in the studio and started sewing it together. And I wasn't at that time thinking so much about the lifespan of this work. I was really thinking about the history of the material, and like I talked before about this idea of tobacco as something that moves between states from solid to sort of a smoke to the ether and back. And so it made sense that it was so delicate. It was something that would crumble and not last. And also as somebody, I think, who did not go to art school and learn anything about like a material practice, I don't really know how to make, say, like, what's an example, like a proper sculpture. I just know like how to like pick up things that are around me and start doing something, you know, because I never had any material training. So I often end up with these sort of impossible materials. But when I made the second flags, I decided I would stop repairing them. And that made a lot of sense to me. And Ella, I really enjoyed what you said about your pillows. And with the second flags, with the first flags, what I was really thinking about was tobacco as this material that has been central to multiple economies. So it's really central to sort of early colonial economy, in capitalist economy in the first colonies, the first British colonies in North America, which were Virginia and Maryland. And also how central it is to indigenous economies, or, you know, pre-colonially and currently. I was thinking about sort of those things as I made it, and I made it in the, you know, with the dimensions of the dollar bill, because the first paper currency of the United States was actually something called, well, it wasn't the United States yet. It was still they were still separate colonies. So the colony of Virginia, for example, was this thing that they called tobacco notes. So it was paper money that represented how much tobacco you had in a storehouse somewhere, because before that, it was actually just tobacco was the currency. So people could pay their taxes or get paid wages or whatever in tobacco. And then it became a dollar, or sorry, paper money, which of course is the precursor to the American dollar bill. So I just had this idea that I wanted to like think about this transition from a pre-colonial economy to a colonial economy, and then consider how the pre-colonial economy sort of has survived in this material, tobacco, and in the way that I was raised using it. And then when I made the second flags, I had this opportunity to really consider the material, having now known it so well. And I called them disintegration and dispersal, specifically because I was thinking about the opposite of accumulation and the opposite of holding together and the opposite of this sort of narrative of permanence. And the way that I've said it other places is if the idea of money under capitalism is something like everybody makes as much of it as they can for themselves, And if everybody does that, then we'll all have some or something. It's like your own hard work, and you just pull in. It's, you accumulate, right? Like capitalism is about growth and accumulation. Whereas in Indigenous economies, and I'm speaking specifically coming from a Korean Métis family, our economies are much more about giving away. So they're about dispersal, right? So if everybody gave away everything they had, then everybody would have enough. It's like the opposite, right? And so when I made the flags, I decided I would just let them disperse, and I would let them disintegrate, and I would let them act out this idea that you don't have to hold on, and you don't have to have this sort of like permanent presence. And of course, some of the flag dispersal has little seed pods on it that by now I'm sure have lost all of their seeds, because as they dry, they crack and the seeds all come out. And those flags can only be shown so many times. Like, I'm not really sure, this is like the third time they've shown. So I'm not sure how many times they can be shown before they'll just be too broken, because I won't be repairing them. So I think when I made them, I wasn't so much considering like acts of care, though I think that's quite nice to think about, but rather I was thinking about these sort of dueling ideas of accumulation and dispersal, and holding on to something and letting it go. And I was wanting the material to sort of act that out.
Yeah, I imagine like those seed pods having kind of dropped along the way. Like maybe there's like a little tobacco seed in some corner of a gallery somewhere in Canada that like a conservator hasn't found, and like the kind of possibilities of that. And also just thinking about what like proper sculpture is, and like what, someone learning how to make like a marble sculpture or something.
I know, I was trying to think of what proper sculpture was, and I was like, yeah, carving marble, but nobody actually learns how to do that anymore, I don't think. Not in art school.
Yeah, I am, and I'm so grateful to have your work kind of join this conversation that began with Ella and Katie's work, because I think it continues to pull on this thread of coming together, pulling apart, circling back, and with the kind of like deterioration or disintegration of material, or the shifting of material, and the kind of the kind of like layered complexity of what that means and what that can do. I'm noticing that we have a few minutes left, I believe. I'm wondering if there were any questions that came in on any of the chats, or if there's any questions from the audience. Blair has a question.
Sure, I have a question. There's also a suggestion in the comments to me to say that maybe during like a Q&A, I might sort of bring up some of the slides as well, and see the work maybe more closely that they were talking. But I was wondering. There's another question. I was wondering about maybe like this notion of debris. Like I think like one of the or of sort of a middle state, and if you, I think one of the things that I noticed when we were kind of installing the work is that there's just so much like kind of life in all of the objects. Like there's I feel like I got like little bits of like everybody's like studio debris, but there's like a sense of like reconfiguring and maybe riffing on what you were saying about acts of care. Could like just letting things be also be kind of an act of care, like letting these materials kind of live out their natural lifespans, or like, if you love something, set it free. Is that even a question?
It's a good t-shirt.
Yeah.
I think someone posted in the chat asking Gabrielle, how do you see these pieces functioning beyond their current placement? Would they become functioning flags placed outside to claim spaces, or are they art objects proper now to be bought, sold, stored?
I think it's flags. They perform really interestingly. And this is something that I was also considering in response to Lillian's question was when I'm thinking about how they crumble, how they break and tear, and what to do about that. I think when you make, because I am making work that's, really about, I guess, economy, and it's about sort of like this hope for a future that's different, hope for a future where we don't live under capitalism and settler colonialism. And I'm building this flag that calls to previous economic systems, but also is, because they're flags, I think they sort of signal this sort of utopic ideal of perhaps another type of political system or another type of national formation. But then the crumbling or like the impermanence of them becomes extra important because I guess because I don't believe in like utopic futures or final answers or political formations that are perfect or meant to stay or something. So I think like as flags, they do have a special function in sort of being anti-flags, because they suggest the decay of any sort of system that they might like attempt to stake into the ground. So that doesn't quite answer your question, but that's my thinking about them as flags. And they do live as art objects, yes. Until they don't exist anymore, I guess.
I was just thinking, Blair, maybe you can remind me because I'm not going to know the whole story, but wasn't there like a pitch for a new flag that did kind of, it was Joanne.
Yeah, I came across this Joanne Bristol. There was a project from maybe like the 90s in Regina, where I used to live, and yeah, I think there was like a project where they invited artists to sort of design like alternative flags for Canada, and Joanne Bristol's flag proposal was just this flag that was like a photo of clouds on a blue sky. And so the idea would be that like during a nice day, you wouldn't even see it. It would just look like blue sky, no sort of nationhood or no like sort of symbol of empire. But then on a cloudy or overcast day, you would see this image of like clouds on a blue sky, like a nice day. And it would remind you that like this like weather is kind of temporary, or this like state is temporary, and it would like maybe get nicer. And I kind of thought that was a really beautiful proposition. Oh, Ella.
I have a question for Lillian. Lillian, you're saying that we've been talking about this for a year. I think it's been almost 2, probably closer. But time is a construct. But I'm wondering, like, through our conversations and the reading that you've been doing, but also just as like a lived person in the world, has your understanding or relationship to touch changed? Like if you mentioned like in the show at Susan's, sort of like being increasingly aware of sort of the clumsiness of your body, which I'm like always quite aware of my own. But yeah, I'm just curious to hear sort of like over 2 years, really paying attention to touch and contact points, how you have shifted over that time period.
That's a good question. I didn't expect any questions.
Sorry, I'm throwing you a curveball.
I think like I like as much as I sort of like perform the anxiety or like the kind of like presence, like my kind of like hyper awareness of a presenceness of my body. I think like having these conversations have kind of allowed that to evolve into more of like a curiosity rather than like a kind of like pain. So it comes like, I think talking about like kind of lumbering even and like carrying something heavy and being terrified I'm going to drop it, or this kind of like conversation of how to pull these things together, to consider how people will dance around and move through them. Like it kind of makes me more comfortable and like my own kind of like bodily experience or something. So I've like really enjoyed it in terms of having people that I can have conversations with, and then also like having these objects that I can kind of build relationships with, that kind of deal to different degrees with this. But yeah, like the weight of bundle, the kind of like the kind of way that we were having Brooks like place the Diana blanket, which you can see in this slide, and being like, just drape it, just fold it a bit, like, or the kind of like awkward like bend of trying to roll your low casters around, and it's sort of like I don't know but yeah, like I guess some of the like existential pain has gone away temporarily or something. That's maybe a little too real, but I think it's like a question that I kind of am continually interested in. But yeah, I think that's probably how I can answer it right now, if that answers it at all.
I mean, I also think about like at least Katie and I have also been arts workers. I don't know about you, Gabe, but like over just periods of time, like my level of carrying like very expensive paintings around, the anxiety also shifts, and one becomes like more comfortable as one becomes,
Yeah.
Also that, like, you change as a human also over 2 years. Like it's not just,
Yeah, and I think like, oh, sorry, Katie.
I was gonna comment just something I was thinking about, maybe just in response to Blair's question, even of like things piling up in the studio. I think that as a painter, and also hearing Gabe talk about like fixing artwork, because I went through a process of that at one point too, and was like, I never want to do this again. Like the idea of having your artwork come back to your studio was something I did not enjoy at all. But I also think that I've always kind of loved that idea of like, oh, well, I'm making work that's constantly falling apart, was something that got me kind of interested in thinking about art conservation and restoration, and kind of the ways that artworks are treated by other people, and kind of that role. I guess you're talking about care for artworks, but it's kind of led me into interesting research, and also maybe making me think in my own paintings about things like patching and kind of repair within the work. So not necessarily that I want it coming back to the studio after someone else is responsible for it, I'm fine with it breaking down then. But I became interested in kind of allowing the kind of process of breakdown and then repair or patching or covering up become part of the work. And I think it became interesting to kind of learn more about different processes and the ways that paintings have been cared for and kind of repaired or made to look perfect again or allowed to look broken at kind of different points in history. Those visuals became really exciting to me, just kind of inspiring, and also thinking through like the different narratives that kind of can be present in a single painting at once. So that wasn't answering anyone's question, but when Blair was talking about accrual in the studio, I was thinking about kind of adding things to the work has become part of making for me.
Yeah. And also like having Nick and Ali and then yourself, Katie and Shelby, like kind of create these sort of like things that are like in addition to the physical show. Like it's been really interesting to kind of have other people then interpret these kind of like conversations and kind of experiments and kind of reflect them back, which is probably not unique, but just like, so maybe my way of saying like, stay tuned for those other things too. I think getting to like read drafts of Nick's writing and hear what Ali is planning for her performance. I think, yeah, it was like a kind of furthering of the experiment of like, yeah, this interaction or like this installation.
I was wondering if I could also bring forward some of the questions from the chat or comments from the chat.
Yeah.
A comment from Lee Bridges that says, I enjoy the discussion of intuitive relationship with material, the sense of touch, feedback, and risk while making the work and extending that to the installation. Also, the idea of support. The idea of support or the support becoming a point of contact with so much of the work, which seems so much to me like an act of caring. So I think I'm also kind of interested in, and I guess this is maybe something that Lily and I talked about when we were doing our tour, is that like the curator's hand is very like present in this exhibition, but it also feels kind of collaborative. So it feels like a kind of a gentle hand, but it is also like this real act of caring, and maybe we could like riff on that and say like to curate is to sort of care for. And I think there's like some very interesting kind of gestalt at play that I think is sort of sweet and funny and theatrical and sometimes like a little bit like bratty. And I also have a question from Mark Neufeld for Gabrielle. And he says, your lack of art school training doesn't seem to have been a problem. I also love your insight into the idea of tobacco notes. And I love the idea of flags made out of tobacco. How do you see these pieces functioning beyond their current placement? Oh, we've answered this, haven't we? Would they become functioning flags outside? We answered that. So
I wouldn't mind responding. Sorry, no, I always talk a lot. To Blair, to your sort of comment around curation and care, because I think we often think about, or even systems of support, as in sort of often gendered sort of congratulatory terms, that that care is gentle, or that it's something that is always sort of apparently beneficial, when I think it can also, acts of care or support can also be antagonisms or questions or pushing or asking someone to take a risk. And I felt like that was definitely part of this show in the process. Also just the risk of trying to put it on in a way that none of us had ever put on a show before across Zoom, and Zoom in a space where people were trying their best, but it also like had very real issues like Wi-Fi constraints and whatnot. And so there was a form of critique, I feel, in the systems of care that were enacted in this process, which I found interesting and kind of opened that space up. Like, it's sort of like how we always talk about like systems of collaboration in, like, what's the term I was kind of like idealized, when like collaboration can also ask us to rethink our place in the world or rethink the objects that we have relationships with.
And tech is collaborating too, right?
Like, even like collaborating not just with people, but also like with objects. Like when Gabe was describing her relationship to this tobacco, like, and the disintegration of it, that like very real sort of like the risk of working with something that is so close to falling apart or having a life of its own, like it does.
Wow. Oh. I was wondering, maybe we could circle back again to another comment of Mark's that is about late modernist abstraction and whether supports surfaces or the Washington Color School. As somebody working in ostensibly figurative traditions, Katie, is your work in part an attempt to bring back aspects of more radical painterly discourses into your work, or is exposing a process of deciding a response to other things?
Blair, can you repeat the last part of the question? I feel like that's the main part of the question.
Sorry, sorry. I'm sort of navigating like several windows on my small laptop. So, okay. As someone who is working in an ostensibly figurative tradition, is your work in part an attempt to bring aspects of more radical painterly discourses into your work, or is, quote, exposing a process of deciding a response to other things?
I guess I feel like it's a good question, but I'm less familiar with the terms. Like, it's in here, right? Radically painterly discourses. I guess I don't quite know, Mark, what you mean. Or like that bringing figurative back. I guess I feel like figurative's always been kind of present in my work, and I feel like figurative is very back right now. So I'm not bringing it back, but I feel like Blair, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, Mark, like, are you?
Hey, yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, Katie. So sorry for the garbled question. I just thought your line exposing a process of deciding was a great line, and it made me think of Duchamp on the one hand, and like late modernist abstraction on the other hand, where you see all the decisions that are made, you know, in a work. Like I think of, you know, Kenneth Noland, or I think of Jules Olitsky, or that, you know, that tradition of everything being there present in the artwork. Visual, you know, all the decisions are visual on the surface. So I'm just wondering if your idea there, which again I think is a great line, exposing a process of deciding, is that like what is that? I guess it's just a question, where did that come from for you? That pressure to expose the process of deciding, or that pleasure in that idea.
I think it is painterly now that you're describing the question. I think
I've emerged from behind the Zoom. Yeah.
There's a real kind of pressure, I think we talk about, at least in school, like in classes and like with painting, of like something being finished. And I think it applies to all kind of artworks, but the idea of knowing when making art is something that I feel like I've never known. And eventually I kind of maybe came around to an idea of liking that or accepting that. I'd say it goes beyond art making. I think that not knowing is part of my personality, and kind of questioning things and wanting to be open to rethinking, but also confidence. I think it kind of feels like a part of me that is there in the work as well. But it feels like something I've been able to kind of work back into. For instance, like you kind of referencing this, exposing a process of deciding, where I've kind of come around to the fact that the work can be about that the work doesn't have to be static or decided, or I don't have to know the answer. It's about kind of figuring something out and showing that rethinking is the same as knowing, like or kind of has the same amount of power, I guess. And I guess the one thing I wanted to say is that, like, yes, they are decidedly figurative. And I think for me, that just it's part of the wanting, or like the desire in the work, is that I'm like looking for a figure. They're unplanned, but kind of the figure being something that I'm like striving towards, and also kind of like looking for in any kind of like mush of paint. So I keep finding them and kind of repurposing the figure in different ways, I guess.
Right. That's these pieces look great. Thanks for that. So I just wanted to sort of linger on the earlier part of the question for a second. So is are the decisions you make then when exhibiting the work, like the blue walls or the back of the wall, are those like, do you see them as like recovering lost moments from the production of the work, that maybe something that was there earlier that you sort of want to manifest in the exhibition?
Oh, that kind of phrasing certainly speaks to me of the mural or the kind of wall piece that I did at Susan Hobbs, like in the first iteration that Lillian mentioned, because it really kind of like referenced the way that I draw, or the way that I kind of like make underpaintings more directly. But yeah, I think that experimenting with installation really kind of could be kind of tied to the way that things can fall or kind of lean or happen by accident in the studio. Yeah, I like that relationship for sure.
All right, thanks, Katie.
Thanks.
Do we have any other questions? Perhaps. Have any more questions or comments? We have some thank yous for a very inspiring and thoughtful talk, and it was really wonderful to hear about everybody's work. I guess I would like to second that. And like I said, I would really encourage everyone who's in Winnipeg to keep their eyes open for updates from the School of Art Gallery regarding an opening or some sort of limited capacity operations that will allow you to come see this exhibition and like smell it and sort of feel it all around you. It's really quite a beautiful experience, and there's a lot of like lovely kind of haptic surprises that I think you'll appreciate. And thank you so much to Lillian and Katie and Ella and Gabrielle for joining us tonight. It was really great.
And stay tuned for a publication. We'll be mailing it to some folks if anyone's interested. So just a small 2 essays So stay tuned. But
Yes.
thank you so much to Blair and the School of Art Gallery for hosting us tonight. And also to Ella Dawn, Gabrielle, and Katie. Thank you for your patience with my questions that were embedded with apologies.
And thank you. And Mark, I'm sorry I read your question twice. I have, there are many windows open on my screen.
That's okay, Blair. I
I'm
understand.
terribly embarrassed. It was the question so nice. We read it.
Read it twice.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, take care. Have a great rest of your night.
Thanks, everyone.